one of the pieces, as Michelle has mentioned, we're using those words routines. And one of the routines that we want to have consistent, and you have kept consistent, is that shared learning component and bringing people that can move our learning forward together as a network. Looking at the 4-5 change in the assurances this morning, we felt as a leadership team and the ELTF that looked at your feedback from earlier said, we need to dedicate some time to 4-5. And so Geanice Miller from Van Buren ISD and Melissa Wing from Genesee ISD are here to lead us through a process which is going to allow you to spend some time digging into the 4-5 essentials, thinking about those explicit connections to K3, and guide us in some meaningful conversations. So Melissa and Geanice, whenever you are ready to start, you can begin. Thank you so much for joining us and leading us.
Yeah, thanks, Heather.
Good morning.
Good morning. So as Heather said, having this shared learning is really critical. And going back to what Michelle Goley said earlier this morning, when we look at the legislation, we see that we've now expanded to 4-5. And a lot of our coaches, we know part of when people were hired, we were looking at coaches, educators who had experience in early literacy. And so now we're expanding into 4-5, and there may be a bit of discomfort. Maybe people don't have as much experience working with those grades, or maybe they hadn't been in those classrooms before. And so we wanted to, as a task force, we went through this process and then afterwards realized that this could be a process as we evaluate where we go next with 4-5, what needs to be revisited, what learning needs to happen, that this would be a good process for the whole network. So thank you, Michelle, and the rest of the planning committee for asking Melissa and I to do this together. So you'll see in the agenda, again, relinking the legislation is right here, which Michelle had earlier as well. And then we also included a little bit going back to the history as well that Michelle mentioned earlier. Back for some of us have been here a while, and back in March of 2019 is when they did pretty much the one and only like statewide learning around the 4-5 essentials. It was an all-day virtual with 2 researchers. And so you'll see in the agenda that we have the PDF for part 1 and part 2 of that grade 4-5 virtual learning that took place in March of 2019. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. People will be able to go ahead and look back through that. But what we really want to do, and I'm going to pass off to my colleague, Melissa Wing, here in just a second, is get people thinking and giving you time in breakouts to really process, take a look at the document. Where do you see where you need a little bit more? And where do you, when you look at K3 and 4-5 next to each other, where do you see commonalities and where do you see differences? So Melissa Wing.
Well, so good morning, everybody, and thanks for having us here. So the next portion is really about you digging into the 4-5 essentials. So on the agenda, you'll find a link that says there's a discussion with your colleagues, and you're going to use the table that's attached kind of to guide your thinking and your discussion. So here it is. It'll force you to make a copy so you can type on this as a group. For my group, I made copies. So one of the things you're going to do is kind of look at the K3 essentials and the 4-5 essentials. People are familiar with the K3, so we want you to look at what are the differences between the K3 and 4-5. And as you're doing that, you're going to be noticing things that there are some similarities. And so that might not be as big a leap for you in your coaching, but we really want you to dig into those 4-5 essentials to see what are the differences between the K3 and the 4-5. And then what are some ways for like essential 1, you'll see listed first, that is the K3 essential, and second is the 4-5. So if you don't have the document, at least you have that first part, but we really want you to look at the bullets and all of those pieces. And then after looking at those, how to support the differences in the 4-5. So what are some things that you might need or start thinking about as a group of how might we support teachers in 4th and 5th grade in implementing these essentials? So you can identify the differences from the K3 and 4-5 and jot that on your chart. And then do you know how to support them? And If you do know those supports, go ahead and put those supports in. And you're gonna get about 20 minutes. And a couple things we want you to consider as you're looking at these is, what is it essentially you'd like to explore further in this network? And what might you need next to continue to develop your understanding? And those kind of things you could jot in additional notes, and I believe we're gonna put some in a Slido later. But what questions does anybody have?
I was just going to mention too, and Heather Hubbard, the essentials, the K3 document and 4.5 are also linked in that table. So it's another way to access it. And then also using the information from the Slido to drive further work. So it's really important that when you put that information in the Slido, that you consider like what you're sending in that Slido will be used and discussed as further planning happens.
Thank you for that clarification. And you're gonna have about 20 minutes. So there are 10 essentials. So don't spend a lot of time on each one. So you can kind of get through to get a feel for all of them. And if you have more time, then you can go back and look more deeply at them. But we kind of want you to see which ones you're gonna need support in.
Yes, thank you both for that, the direction. I think it's just really important as you're scanning through these and having those conversations to say, what do we need next and which essential? And that, if you kind of keep that frame of reference, like Melissa and Geanice said, it will really drive what we do next in the network.
Just to help guide it.
Heather, do you want
Because
me to try to make them public?
And be thinking about what bullets you might need more support on in order to coach 4 or 5 teachers. It might be something that you're not as familiar with, such as literacy, group work. It could be literature circles, things like that.
So thinking of the learning in addition to resources.
Ooh, look at the numbers at the top. You can start to see the words that are mentioned frequently.
And Michelle and Heather, I'm not sure, can they enter more than once? Like when I did mine earlier, I did a whole list, but can they add multiple?
Yes, so we can get up to 1,000 responses. So there are 370 on Zoom, but many of you are in rooms together. There's over 600 of us that may be present. And so we could have multiple answers, but just know that there's only 1,000 total. So if you can put your answers in 1 to 2, that helps a lot. I am going to, we can see some ways that this is going to continue to develop as people put their answers in. I want to thank Geanice and Melissa for guiding us through this, because this is really valuable feedback to think about where we need to go as a network, and to all of you for having those conversations, taking the time to dig in and provide this feedback. With that, we're going to head into lunch right exactly at noon. I will leave this open, so feel free if something comes to mind to pop in and answer, add that in, and we'll
And
be
two
back. Go ahead,
quick
Michelle.
notes, Heather, just as you're heading to lunch, if you haven't done the thank you thoughts for Erin, please try to do that at lunch. And when we come back, I am going to have a naming convention that should help us in breakout rooms listed on here right under lunch. So when you pop back in, if you come in a minute early, you might need to reconsider your naming just so that we're ready to go for breakouts again.